The second episode of Oddities and Anomalies. I'm your host, Kruger, and with me is co-host, Mr. Dan. How are we doing tonight, Mr. Dan?
Doing pretty good, Mr. Kruger.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And tonight, our topic of discussion will be the multiple legends of the Goatman.
The Goatman itself has taken on a life of its own. As I've looked and studied and done research on the lore itself of this particular urban legend, there is multiple men um, that carry the name Goatman, and depending on which region of the United States, hell, even Canada, and I think I found one in Northern Europe, but there everywhere you look, there is a different version. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the other ones. We're going to go here now into the detail about the ones from the South and the Northeast. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those are the ones that are the closest to, and we're closest to, and that we've heard since childhood.
Yeah. Um, there are some similarities to the tales of the Goat Man. There are some inconsistencies, but all in all, it's a pretty basic tale. I'll let you go with yours because as I was doing mine, mine has changed quite a bit. In fact, mine was very much similar to yours until later on. I learned more about it towards my later teens, and the first thing that the guy who told me about it said was, "Forget that other one you learned. That's bullshit. That's one they tell kids." So I guess we could start with yours if that's how you want to go, and we'll talk about the inconsistencies with other stories.
Well, that's the fun part. You're talking about how the legend in your area has changed over time, and in doing my research for tonight's episode, I ran into the exact same thing. The legend has taken on a whole new life and has new things involved. You know, it's actually a lot more grand than what I originally heard growing up.
Mhm.
My first exposure to said goat man was hearing tales on the playground, at elementary school. And I'd never heard of anything before. And then when I'd come home, it's that vivid to me. I'd come home and ask my father and everything about what is this about a goat man, and then he told me this whole legend I'd never heard before.
Mhm.
I mean, the things you pick up on the playground, this monster that stalks the night, it's the devil and hatchet.
And I wanted to, before we get into that, as we get into it, I wanted to discuss when again, I want you to tell the story before we get into it, but I do want to talk about the parallels that there are between um, the neo-Christian Lucifer, the devil, and the Goat Man, and why I think that this is also I think that the depiction of the Goat Man is one of what I would say a demon um, in some lores, because I think that I truly believe that the legend started from stories of the Bible. And again, this is all going through research, but I don't let me forget that. I want to touch on that. And if you have nothing further with that, I really want let's just jump into it. Let's just you let us hear the legend of the northeastern American goat man.
All right. Well, I was the very first one I heard,
Okay.
because, and then I'll get to the point of telling you what it comes out as to the younger generations now, which is a completely different story.
Okay.
Um, the original Bowie, I mean the Bowie, story I heard happened, Bowie, Maryland. This dates back to the early to mid '60s, where it really took on a new life somewhere in the '70s. Something in the press, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
The way I heard it then was, those were still back in the days where they had things like Lover's Lane, places like that, where that had their driver's licenses and their cars. They could go with, their significant others and, make out or do what they do. I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics of that, but,
Mhm.
and, places to go alone and, do those sort of things. And this legend started of, this goat leg, something along the lines of the Greek mythological creature known as Pan.
Mhm. And for those of you who don't know who Pan is, Pan was was basically a goat that walked upright, similar, not quite a centaur, but he had the legs of a goat, and the pan flute, which is a bunch of pipes connected, one longer and at the end shorter, and he told tales. He was also a guardian in some lore and a protector. He had, like I said, like Kruger said, he had the head of a goat, the body of a man, and the torso of a man, and the legs of a goat. Um, there are some legends that say Pan was a malevolent creature, and there are some that say that he was the opposite. And um, but part of that is also lore that leads into the story. And I'll let you continue.
Yes, I'm exactly sure a hatchet got added to this legend.
Isn't a hatchet in all
Now,
these kind of stories, though?
oh yeah, of course. And basically, this the way the legend of this was is up this road called Fletcherstown Road. Legend worked that back in the woods. There was this cursed individual that was the Goat Man and would stalk people in the woods, and apparently could appear walking up and down the road as an old man. Looking to hitchhike or whatnot, and, you cross the Goat Man, he'll come find you.
Mhm.
You're doing that evil teenage thing, with your partner, and gonna find your car. He's gonna come up and beat on your windows and take his hatchet and chop you, point like your normal Jason or Freddy or somebody like that. That's how the original legend went. Now I heard a personal story growing up. One of the baby boomers said they were apparently parked off the side of Fletcherstown Road, and they a couple of cases of beer, and they were sitting up there. They had their car doors open. There was a bunch of them, music and whatnot, and apparently something attacked the cars. Tore out of there, like got a bit more public area. Everyone parked. Everybody started looking around, and they noticed that come in and was beating on the cars. And that's what gave them all a good scare, and they all took off. Now, was it some goat or malevolent teenager that showed up and said, "Hey, let's scare the shit out of them"?
Yeah. I mean, and that being that area, people knew the lore. So who's to say someone didn't go? And I'm sure they had known somebody that knew that they were going to be there. So who's to say someone didn't do it? But then again, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, no pun intended, but all stories, whether they be fiction or fact, start with some form of truth. And perhaps there was something to go on with that. But again, I want you to continue with the story because I know that you have a two. There's two parts to yours, and as you listen, I want you to remember that stories always
Well,
start with some section of truth.
oh yeah, there's some semblance of truth somewhere. As I've been up and down Fletcherstown Road over the years numerous times, said or anything walking through the woods. Of course, the area is now a lot more built up than it was back in those days. Legend, from what I gather, kind of went quiet through the end of the 60s. People's minds were in other places other than the stalker in the woods. Gained a new life in the early to mid 70s. Somebody's dog went missing, and said dog turned up dead. Had been murdered, probably by a pissed off neighbor, and the press got a hold of it. And all of a sudden, Goatman, everyone went Goatman crazy. As Goatman's out there in the woods, he's killing people's animals. He's eating them. And you know how when the press gets a hold of anything, it's kind of like the legend of Bigfoot. It becomes this whole other monster.
Whole other story, whole episode we can do on Bigfoot.
Well, that's the funny part. And then you really don't hear much about it, but the origins of the second legend started kind of taking hold somewhere in the mid to late 80s, I'd say. If you'd like me to just jump right into that one, I can do that as well.
Well, the only thing I would say with that, and I hope you can agree with this, when it comes to legends like that, as we talked about in the last episode, history tends to repeat itself, but it always comes back different to an extent, like more updated. And I think that's what happens with a lot of urban legends. I think that and that's no different here. And I get that plays into my side of this whenever I tell you when I speak on the stories I've heard. But I
Well,
think
that was the
that
next thing I was going to ask you is Sid kind of has a multiple parts, as does mine. Do you want to go ahead first and discuss the oldest known of the Texas Goat Man?
yes, I can. Same similar timeline, 60s and 70s. It took hold, and basically they would hear something bleeding out in the woods, like a goat, and it would sound just like a goat, but it would thrash and it would roar. Like the bleeding was like it wasn't like a normal goat, like a ram. It was like a lion bleeding, and it would terrify campers. It would terrify fishermen. It would and they would find bloody footprints that were in the shape of hoofs, and people would come up missing, and children would say that their parents had never come back to their camp, and the goat man uh, would ask them if they wanted to go. So then you had stories about the children of the goat man who wanted them to go, and these are the children who didn't want to go, and how the goatman never harmed a child; it would protect them, and it was a twist. It's very similar to yours that he would come out and do these things, but it was like he was building franchises. He was building an army, and the only thing was he had his own island. Um, in the in this area, there's a place called Lake Worth, and there's a giant island. And the thing about Lake Worth is that you can't fish there. You can't get anything out of the water because there's a bunch of old crashed planes in the water and a bunch of old jet fuel. There was actually talk of possibly setting the lake ablaze to burn off all the fuel, but then again, that would have been hazardous to the environment, and you can't do that. But right in the center of the lake is a large island, and that's where they say that the children would end up going. And at night, you would see campfires on Goatman's Island, and anytime someone would go there, there would be nothing.
That's
And
what I
so the
found
legend grew because
fascinating about your legend, though, was your Goat Man has his own island
yeah,
crib. He's got, he's like, it's like what's the island of Doctor Moreau? That kind
yeah,
of feel with all the
yes,
monsters on the island.
yeah. That was it. I mean, and as a kid, when I heard that one, I didn't know that was him. I heard the legend of this creepy monster man, but that's all I knew. It wasn't until I had gotten older that I heard the other side of my tale, and again, that's so much different than yours, as we discussed before we did this recording, or we did this stream. So with that, I guess I would let you go and jump into your part.
Okay, well, we can start with part two, which is the current urban legend. And I had heard the first seeds of this back in what I said the mid to late '80s, and it hadn't really been fleshed out. But apparently, through the '90s and 2000s, they fleshed it out quite well. This facility that I'm going to talk about, there's a whole urban legend about this place as well. You know, all of the different things that come there. An agricultural center, known to people locally as the government farm. I mean, in all reality, and I told you this, I could walk to it within 2 hours. It's not that far from me. But people have been, as far back as I can remember, people have been talking about this place, and the government, experiments on the wildlife, and it's basically a farm. There's cows in some places. There's horses at night. You can there, and there's plenty of deer laying around in the different fields. In different parts of the roads, when you're driving through the area, are closed off, or top security type deals. You can't go through there. You'll run into armed security. Government security.
Yeah. Same thing we have over here on the bases.
I mean, the earliest legends I would hear about that place is, numerous, the see-through cow you could find up there, and apparently at some point, they'd taken it to where you couldn't see it, like off the side of the. It's actually a rather big complex. Tied to the University of Maryland. It is tied to a lot of the things that go on down in D.C., but it is agricultural center where they do a lot of studies on a lot of different experiments. Cows, they're not mean, they're not nasty. And at night, if you're just looking for a nice place to drew in, get a little quiet and whatnot, it's one of the last places left, around DC where you can actually do that because it's traffic.
Yeah.
And where the legend of the Goatman picks up there, there was a doctor, which here's the funny part, the name of Dr. Fletcher.
Okay.
Now, I remember I mentioned to you earlier about the original legend about Fletcher's Town Road.
Exactly.
And apparently, Dr. Fletcher was a scientist that worked at the agricultural center. And he was into some of these secret government experiments. And the way it takes from there is, apparently, it's like a Swamp Thing. You know who Swamp Thing is, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. DC Comics. Yeah.
Same premise goes on here. He's working on experiments with animals. These experiments goes awry, and Dr. Fletcher becomes, the subject to his own experiment, and half man, half goat goes loose, and he runs around the roads of the agricultural center, as said goat man, and terrorizes people. Now I've been
See
through
that one
there.
that one seems a little more far fetched, like I was talking about earlier with you never told me this when we discussed it partially, but you never told me the whole story. Um, and I you know and the idea of gene splicing is what basically that comes down to, and I think that's a possibility. Like a dog and a cat mix or something DNA. But when it comes down, I think they would put something like that down. If it's especially if it's a government facility, they wouldn't have taken the chance to let something like that get out.
Besides the fact of they have security checkpoints and whatnot in the area, there's no way in hell someone or some creature long and they wouldn't have this thing within the same night.
Yeah.
Some there's but another thing about this area, the agricultural center, local area or to that area, is Crybaby Bridge.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any legends or heard any legends like that.
No.
but history, because we're not going to get too much into that since we're talking about the Goatman stuff. Is, there's a bridge up in there somewhere. Some woman got pregnant, early, late teens, didn't know what to do with it, got upset, threw the baby. You go there in the middle of the night, you turn your headlights on, baby crying.
Yeah. No, that one's not one I've heard, and not in this area at least.
But the agricultural center, those are the two main urban legends that are attached to that joint.
You see, that makes my me feel a little more creeped out about mine because I mean, at least there's a way to refute some of those that you've been the one you were talking about towards the end there. And if you don't mind, I'm going to jump into the second legend I heard, if you're okay with that.
Oh, let's hear it.
Well, this is much later. I don't know how the conversation came up, but I just remember being in high school and we were talking about our old myths. I said, and I remember saying something about some guy that lives over in Lake, the island in Lake Worth. I'm like, oh, you talking about the Goat Man? I was like, yeah, I guess that's it, man. Some guy with goats and shit. He goes, man, don't believe that bullshit. And there was this one kid, there was this one kid in school who was he didn't talk for shit. I mean, he's and I wouldn't say he's a goth kid, but he's definitely a loner. And we were sitting at lunch table, and he said, "No, I know the real story." And I was like, "The real story? Y'all don't even believe in that old shit." And apparently, this is something that a lot of them had heard about. And he began to tell the tale of an old man who was old as time itself, muscular, a build of between 6'8" and 7 feet, a chin strap beard that came down to his chest, a very burly man who wore nothing but canvas pants, like thick leather, and walked barefoot. He wore a necklace of finger bones, and his nails were as black as coal.
Oh, this is getting better and better by the minute.
His hair was gray with patches of black, and it came down to his shoulders. And on his head, he wore a crown of ram's horns. He lived on the island, and those who came too close, he would give a warning.
And this is the real quick. This is the same island that you were discussing in the older legend, correct?
Yes, yes. And his warning would not be that of word or sight. It would not be that of sound or vision. And again, this is what I can remember him telling me. But he would leave the decapitated head of a goat at your camp. That would be your only warning. For those who did not heed the warning of the goat man, that would be the last night they would be alive. The last image those who did not heed the warning of the goat man would see would be his hatchet and his true eyes, which were that of the goat. Now, you always had somebody's cousin, whose sister, whose brother, whose mother, whose dad, or whose boss says they know someone who got away. And they said what the legend meant was the goat man collected skulls and trophies from his kills, and his eyes were that of a goat. The double side, the two dots with a line between them.
Right.
And he was basically a collector of souls. He was damned. He was not nor living nor dead, but stuck here from some forgotten place, making do with what he had. He didn't bother anyone unless you trespassed on his land, and only he could dictate where his land was. Now, here's where it connects to yours a bit. He also, well, he also was telling me about that the goat man did not claim children's souls because they were not old enough to sin properly. which goes back to the Christian Bible. Now, this is when research I was looking up about it. The reason that this one kind of fits with yours is like the possibilities is that they say this goat man travels. As those seasons change, he travels to different areas of the country, of the world even. And he has sections in the world where he calls home for that particular time of year, for that particular year itself. It just depends on, there's just so many different aspects of why he does what he does. And that's why there could be a goat man in the Northeast or in Canada or in the Midwest or here down south even. But here's the funny thing about that. My dad, who is an immigrant from Mexico, I told him about the story. And he says, and I'm going to talk like my dad because he kind of sounds like Tony Montana, but he says, mijo, which is like, boy, there's a legend that you call the yuba chupacabra, mijo. They say it's the goat eater, lizard man. But, mijo, there's other tales of the goat man, the chupa. He's a man who uses the goat as tools, as a way of survival, as his symbol, mijo. And I've always believed in the legends, mijo, because it's a powerful thing. Legends, they come and they teach you because they come from the truth, mijo. You never forget the past. You never forget what wise men tell you because they've seen. And when he would go on and tell me these things like this, it would almost bring a chill down my spine that this being, my dad was like in my eyes, my dad was the toughest guy I knew, and for him to show some sort of fear to this told me that maybe, just maybe, there's more to this legend than meets the eye. Maybe there is a man that travels the world with the finger bones and a hatchet. Maybe he's not from this world. Maybe he does prey on people in cars. And maybe he does wear a crown of horns. But I don't like I've never seen it and I've never been stupid enough to go looking.
That one I actually have gone looking for, and I have, I've never found said goat man anywhere.
I don't think you ought to be talking if you found some goat man.
Oh no, I'd be telling the world, but I'd be locking all the doors and sitting here talking with my shotgun in my lap, just in case he got internet access.
you know, going like I said, I got touched on it before. The goat is always, and I think you know this. The goat has always been a symbol of demonic praise. The goat's always been the symbol of the devil. And I don't per se say believe the goat man is real. I believe there's a legend, but I also think that part of it could very well be Christian mothers and fathers using the one animal that has always been tied to Lucifer and using that to scare their children. And then that legend grew. And then all of a sudden now he has his own island,
Well,
he has his own internet site.
here's the funny part.
he is
You've got this guy running around with ram's horns, chopping people up with hatchets and whatnot. But if you look at the real creatures, the real animals, and in their own wild habitat, these are the kind of creatures that get stuck up on rocks on mountains and can't find their way back down. Should you really be
yeah.
afraid of someone who is half that?
I would say no. Why you can't? Why would you be afraid of that? But think about this. Think about its other half. It's a human being. Predators.
Well, that's what
We're the top of the food chain.
when you first told me about that newer legend of the goat man from your area. What was my response? Do you remember? Because I can tell you
Remind me.
when I said, "What the hell is this shit?" Is this the what I called it the cross between a mafioso and a predator
Yeah.
goat man?
Well, see,
Because the legends of of the Italian mafias, when they were sending a warning, or a death threat
horse head,
or death promise,
pig's head, things like
well,
that.
you wake up with a horse head next to you.
Well, me and a mutual friend of ours was talking, and we're talking about the image, for that you'll see it on the thumbnail for this video. But if you look at that image, and that's an image I pulled straight from like a Wikipedia site about the Goat Man. Notice the way his hair is. It's in that chin strap beard fashion.
Yeah, that
Like
satanic looking fashion.
and I
The,
looked
the
at it
kind that Aleister Crowley used to carry.
exactly, and I'm thinking to myself, I've heard this legend, but I didn't go looking this up for that. What the fuck? And if you think, it could very well be a man who did these things, did something like this. And the reason they called him the Goat Man is because his face was very heart shaped,
And
and the outline of his beard.
here's something that really,
Huh?
this that really sends me in that direction is now if you go into the dawn of man and into prehistory and you know you know pre-biblical times slash biblical times, warriors from all different nations across the planet, to intimidate their foes, they would wear the
Would wear the
skins and
heads
the
of.
heads of the animals they would kill.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure that's where the Greek mythological beast, the Minotaur, comes from. Is probably somebody who wore a boar's head. I mean, not
Bull.
boar's head, but you know what I meant.
Bull. Yeah. I mean, you have to go no further than Hollywood itself. You've seen the movie Gladiator. I think anybody that's watching this has probably seen that movie at least once. Remember, if you're watching that movie, there's a man in that movie wearing an ox's head,
If you
and
go
it's
back
just
to, did you ever see Time Bandits?
probably years ago. I just don't remember.
It's the one about the little people that travel through time and they basically have like God's map, different periods.
Okay, okay, yeah, that sounds familiar.
Well, in the piece of it that's like ancient Greece, where Sean Connery actually ends up being king. It starts out with him fighting a man with a bull's head on his head,
Yeah,
and after he vanquishes his foe, he takes said bull's head with him as like his trophy.
yeah. It's just like we're talking about this specific urban legend, and like I remember after having that conversation with my dad, and I didn't mean to get so somber with it. I didn't mean to say, get creepy with it, but that's just the way he depicted it to me, and as well as that the guy from school. And
Well,
but when I think about it,
here's where I'm leading with it is
what's
in
that?
the area where the goat man originated was more farmland and kind of quiet back when the legend started. Who's to say it wasn't some grumpy, pissed off farmer that had goats and he decided to use, their pelts and things as, a way to, get teenagers to fuck off or neighbors or stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I was when looking this up, and I may have missed it, but I looked up, and I was gonna what I was gonna get to with the whole somber tone thing is, I looked up, you know, uh, murders by the Goat Man, reasons for the Goat Man thing. But I couldn't find, I thought that perhaps maybe there was somebody who killed people, and they were a goat farmer or something like that. But I couldn't find anything that stuck to the lore, you know.
Well, that's what you
I
word of mouth wise about all these murders and whatnot, but there's no evidence.
yeah. Like I said, like that guy said, his cousins, brothers, sisters, babies, mama's dad. It's always that. And feasibly, could there be a wild man out there, survivalist who pulled this off? I doubt it. With the way things are and the way people are now. I don't think the goat man could survive because I don't know about you, but in my neck of the woods, you come to one of the neighborhoods I used to live in, you see a man dressed like that, he's gonna get shot in the fucking head.
Well, if you think about it,
But
if you go back to the earliest urban legends of my area and yours, you pretty much said they start out at the same time. Said person being either a person in in costume or just some an actual abomination in nature. Said creature would be in their 60s and 70s at this point in time.
yeah, but then you go to the supernatural point, a part of it, and again, this is oddities and anomalies. You go between Pan, and Pan is an ever-existing creature. And then you go into demonic base. There are demons that are known in the Christian Bible to have fucking the heads of goats and horses and stags and things of that nature. And I mean, there's not enough facts to completely dismay this, and depending on what your belief system is and what you believe in, um, it, it's very up in the air. I'm a 31-year-old man, so I'm not terrified or worried about the goat man. Knock on wood, but but I mean, I can see parents telling their kids this to make sure they fucking don't fuck up as kids and stuff like that. And I can see how that gave this legend validity and let it keep going.
Well, if you find a lot of these like lovers lane style tales were exactly that, where parents trying to dissuade their children from going out and having sex and premarital sex, having babies too young. They use that fear. Whereas
Yeah.
we're now seeing in the internet age, and if there was a goat man, somebody would have found him by now.
Well, and I think the Goatman itself has evolved into other things. I don't remember if you've heard of a movie called Smiley or whatever, or some shit like that, where basically he was a being on the computer, and if you did something bad, he would show up and kill you through your computer.
Oh, there's so many different versions of that tale. It's insane.
But as I'm saying, like as we've evolved as a society and as the internet's become more prevalent, and, there's more predators on the internet. I think maybe that this entity or this legend that we're talking about now has maybe evolved into that another tale of something like, well, you shouldn't be doing that on the computer, or so and so is going to get you. He's watching. He does it because of this, and he feeds on the impure thoughts of your youth, and and I think that's a lot of where a lot of these base urban legends come from. A basic desire to terrify someone into doing what you want them to do.
Which that practice and that theory and practice has been around since the dawn of mankind.
Yeah. Well, that I think that theory. I mean, again, I keep going. I'm not trying to be heavy Christian Bible on anything, but that theory goes back to the legend or the tales in the Bible. When Moses, when they so when people the Jewish faith celebrates Passover, it's because of them having to take. Oh my God! It just hit me. This just fucking hit me. Think about this. Think about this. Taking goat's blood and marking their doors at night of the night of Passover to let God know that they have suffered, so he would not take their firstborn. Goat's blood. That just fucking hit me. I can't. I went to do research for the last 2 days, and that just hit me right now. You can't pay for fucking enlightenment like that.
Well, let's just put a spin on it. And this is just to show how tales like this can get wild. Is you could say said creature exists and that it's back to repay mankind for the slaughtered goats of said event or something like that, as a revenge tactic. You tell
Yep.
enough people,
It's the
they'll
ha-
believe it. Next thing you know, they'll tell 30 other people. It'll come back to you, and it made a life of its own.
yeah. By the time it goes back to you, it's no longer the goat man; it's the hand of God.
Uh huh. That the goat man is the instrument of God to punish mankind for said travesty.
And that's what it comes down to. It's all about fear. It's fear tactics, and But I think that's a good thing. And that let me spin this around because I mean this is all kind of coming off a little negative, and I don't want it to be that. Let me spin it in this direction. I enjoyed being terrified as a kid. Now that I look back, I enjoyed these legends, these tales, like the man with the hook, and there's always a lover's lane tale about star-crossed lovers who were killed in a car accident, and they're trying to find each other.
Bloody
And
Mary.
huh?
Can't forget Bloody Mary.
I don't even get me started on that shit.
That one.
And all that, yeah, and all that stuff. There's all these things that terrify people enough to that they won't act out these superstitions, and when you get older and you tell your kids about that, or you tell your friends about that, you have there's almost a bond there. There's almost a kinship to say, wow, we survived our childhood and it was fucked. And I don't think kids nowadays have that. I don't we have our fucking iPhones, we have our Twitters, and we have our internets and shit. And I think that kids are missing out on that. I think that youth is missing out on fear. And not fear to fucking ruin a person's life, but fear to just make you feel something.
Well, these younger generations of millennials, they very much, they don't have those fears. They don't have those tales. They've got whatever you can find on Wikipedia, basically.
Yeah. So, well, depending on how old you are listening to this, whether you're listening to it now or listening to it in the future, and I'm not trying to, spread any kind of propaganda to you, but think about this. If you have young kids or you have teenage kids, sit them down. Take the electronics out of the room for a little while and just say, I'm going to tell you the story of the goat
Yeah,
man.
turn the lights out, light a couple candles up, sit around the kitchen table.
Especially around Halloween, man. Just sit down with your kids and tell them these stories. Tell them the old stories that made you terrified. Tell them the stuff. So, I mean, because I mean that I know we're going a completely different route than I planned on with this,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
it hit me just now, like, and it's a fucking goat man that did it. you know, Fear is not always a bad thing, ladies and gentlemen. It's not. Fear can bring people together in some of the most beautiful ways. You know, take you and I both play the game Friday the 13th. When I was growing up, that shit was terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. I was more for, even though I'd heard of the Goat Man, I was more of afraid to go to sleep with a Friday the 13th movie on because Jason might come get me in my sleep.
Oh, I got it worse. I got it worse for you. The first time I saw Jaws, I would not go to bed because I thought my room was going to flood and he was going to eat me. I know it's stupid, but that's the thing. It was fear for fun. I remember watching a show, and this is going to be so fucking dated, but a Nickelodeon on a show called Salute Your Shorts about Zeke the plumber who got his nose bit off by a parrot, and he would plunge your face to death. He would plunge your soul out of your body. And I think about that stuff now, and it's like there's just not enough. I don't know if you remember the show Are You Afraid of the Dark? Do you remember that?
Yes, I'm a little bit old for it, but I do remember it.
What I'm saying is like there's no more of that. Like there's no kids hanging around a campfire talking about fucking ghost stories. It's just not there anymore. And
No,
it's sad to me.
we used to go to a camp in school, and everybody used to talk about it. You hit, what was it, like fifth grade, and you were eligible to go.
Mhm.
And there was this camp, and basically, you went for your first overnight field trip, which was basically all it was. And of course, they had the whole logs and the campfire and the scary stories. There's not enough mystery left in the world these days.
No,
They spent way too
it's
much
not.
time figuring everything out to where it basically, like you were alluding to, it takes all the fun out of everything.
And I don't think anybody killed the goat man. If we're gonna go bringing it back, bringing it full circle, I don't think anybody killed the goat man. I think the legend of the Goatman has started to die and dissipate because, oh, Goatman, let me go look that up on the internet. Let me go look that up on YouTube. And I guess, I'd like to thank for once here on this channel, we're breathing life back into those urban legends and we're making you question things that, normally you wouldn't anymore. I think it's a travesty. It truly, in my eyes, is a travesty the way things have turned out. And like I said, this is not where I planned on going with it, but now that we're here, I think it's fair to evaluate that and say we need. I think as a people, like the quote, the old adage is, if you do not learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Well,
Well,
that's part of the problem. You know how people talk about, in the entertainment industry, how everything's overdone, everything's a remake. People they when these people that made these classic films, and like we were discussing Friday the 13th, things of that nature. The people that got these ideas, a lot of them, if you go back and read interviews, with the writers and the directors and everything, they heard these kind of legends growing up, and
mhm,
it expanded their mind. They started to create in their own heads, and then things took a life of their own. When everything's fed to you basically on a spoon, you
creativity
don't
dies.
exactly.
And I think, like, if any of you out there are listening and there's an idea and you think of something, write it down. Because that could be the next urban legend. It's sad. It's like I said, I can't beat that horse enough. That goat. Um, it's tragic that all these tales and stories are dying, and it's our own fault. Hell, we were going to have a discussion about a mythical beast that preyed on the innocent and lived on an island and wore the necklace of finger bones, or was an abomination from an experiment gone horribly wrong. But instead, I'm telling you all, we need to save these abominations. We need to save these legends of merciless monsters and expand upon them or create new ones and stop trying to relive the past and make the future just a little darker. If you, if you get where I'm coming from.
Oh, I agree totally. And as you said, a couple of times already, I did not expect this podcast to go this way, but I agree
No,
with you 100%. You know,
you know,
these our children, the generations coming up after us, they don't have that mysticism.
no,
They don't sit there and put their, with a flashlight with their covers over their head in a comic book, wonder if something's coming to after them.
and I think that's tragic. I think that I think we've touched on something more than we planned on. I think that it's a good thing that that happened. And maybe, hopefully, somebody will listen to this and realize, hey, you know what? These guys are right. They might have something here. But uh, just, just, I don't know. I'm just having one of those like epiphanies, and it's blowing my mind right now. I was like, this is not what I planned. It's not, but
It's
I
not at
like
all
it.
what I would had in mind either, but
But
it's just as we were talking, it's like just about any time we talk about anything like this, the conversation goes about five different ways, and you start out on a different track than you began on.
exactly. Well, I mean, like we discussed the other subject we are talking about. I don't want to dive into that because if you want to see that, please go check out our very first episode. But you and I were very touch and go with how that was going to go, and it went to a marvelous place. It actually turned out quite well. We both were very happy with the end product, and I think that's what this it comes down to with anything that we touch, we do. You can't go in expecting it to be a masterpiece, but then at the same time, you can't go in expecting the worst. You just have to do it, and
Well, as
bringing that back, well, bringing that back to this discussion we're having now, we can bitch and moan. We can bitch and moan about how these things are, like they're endangered species, or we're losing our history, or you can just do something about it. And I urge you watching, do, teach your kids these legends, teach your kids about this stuff. Let them enjoy the things you did because I don't know about you, Kruger, but I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't hear these legends. I don't know if I'd be as interested in reading as I am now, or about learning new facts about things that, and learning about the supernatural and things like that had I not gone through those terrifying experiences as a kid. They made me want to learn. So I knew that I could get a wooden stake by my bed, or if I had to get salt, or if I had to get, garlic, or whatever it would take to ward off these monsters that would come after me. Because I wanted to know. I wanted to enlighten myself on those subjects. And I'll be damned if I have children and at the age of 10, they're not carrying some salt by their bed or something because they're worried that something might get them. I feel like I will be a good parent if my kid has salt by his bed. I will feel like I have achieved something as a parent.
Oh, and that's what and just to make it clear right now, said legend of said goat man or men. Do I believe in it? I've actually investigated, and no, I don't believe said person exists or existed. Mainly because of the area of location being this close to DC, and let's just theorize here. Let's take it to that next level. If said
Okay.
person or said being existed, the government would have had their hands on it decades ago.
Well, you and I both know that the government can be a very shady organization, and if
But
they had
here,
something like this,
just
we would never
speculating.
know.
I'm putting a whole nother spin on it without even trying. That's the kind of the point I'm getting to.
Okay.
Is just speculating, just thinking out loud here. Said government grabbed said goat man, 4 decades ago per se, and you could go anywhere with it. But I don't think said creature ever actually existed. I think in my area, the conclusion would mainly be was said creature got created for whatever reason as basically an old wives' tale, and they took said old wives' tale to use on teenagers of the early to mid '60s to keep them out of these lovers' lane type places and keep them from having kids too early. I mean, that's also back in the day, when you don't have kids till you're married and everything in its mother is taboo.
Yeah. And to reiterate from my neck of the woods, I think that possibly my goat man was created to keep people off that island, so they wouldn't get hurt. So they wouldn't, because I mean, you got hurt on the island, ain't nobody gonna find your ass, especially back then in the '60s. There were no cell phones back then. No one's gonna find you. You're gonna die a lonely death on that island.
And the way if it's that old, you're pretty much looking at what that island is a World War II plane graveyard.
Basically. But that being said, and putting a nice bow on everything, what we believe and what I and what Kruger believe means nothing to what you believe. And as an audience, ladies and gentlemen, it's up to you to decide if it's an oddity or
A
an
lot an
anomaly.
anomaly, or is it just fake? Lord knows.
Now, that being said, we have had discussions on what we're going to talk about in our next installment, and you being the host and me being the co-host, I think it's only fair that you start us off and I anchor it off at the end.
Uh, well, next week's episode will be discussing specters and apparitions, and here's the fun part: those that hunt them. There's a lot of believers. There's a lot of non-believers, but these
And
are the
boys and girls,
people looking for the evidence.
and I will tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, watching this now or in the future, I am a believer, and I have had experiences that I have stuck with me and imprinted on my soul, and I'm willing to share those next week when we go live and talk about it. and I'm sure Kruger has a few little nuggets of information he can drop on us all.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say about it is that we've actually gotten our stream slash upload schedule, which should normally be, unless we decide otherwise, weekly at on about Thursday night slash Friday mornings, 12 a.m. Eastern time, 11
11 Central.
Central. I already had you covered.
That's right.
But I really want to get down into the nitty gritty of how real are those people. I mean, I like to consider myself a believer. Now, on this particular issue we discussed tonight, I don't believe in it. When I was a kid, I did. I was terrified
Oh,
of it.
absolutely, and I think that's a when we talk about the structure of this podcast, as we come to the end of the episodes, which we are coming rapidly to, I think that we should give you our idea of what the subject we've talked about, and like guys like Kruger spoke just said, I don't believe in the goat man. I don't think there was a goat man at any point. I think it was all based on some sort of fear hoax or something to keep kids indoors at night. But again, like we've discussed, that's our beliefs. We want you to think about things. We want you to, have your mind churn a bit, think about something different, stop worrying about the status quo and start thinking about yourself. And hopefully, and I don't want to speak for you, but hopefully, um, my hope is that in watching these episodes and looking back, you'll think to yourself, you know what, maybe. Let me think about. Let me look that up. Let me do my own research for myself, so I can educate myself on something different, something new. Not the same old rigmarole that you see on YouTube. This is just us trying to enlighten you with our past experiences as human beings walking this earth, as well as you, igniting that fire of a thirst for knowledge for you.
And two things: one, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and two, if there are things you know about things, should you be watching these podcasts? Things that you'd like to see touched on, or urban legend wise, conspiracy theory wise, paranormal wise, UFO wise, anything of that nature. Put something down in the comments. Say something. If there's something you'd like to see, something you'd like to see discussed, you'd like to actively participate in. Because even though our live chat doesn't do anything, doesn't mean we won't respond to it.
Well, I think we've reached that point. And I guess the question again that I have to pose to you all is, if it bumps in the night, if it squeaks in your halls, if it lights up your sky, it's up to you, ladies and gentlemen, to figure out if it's an oddity or an anomaly. We'll see you next week.